So that's the camera, I think. Is it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I remember an electric organ that I found in the alley next to a dumpster. I was saddened when I saw it leaning there like trash. This is not trash. Why is this here? What a prize. My brief sadness for an inanimate object turned into excitement quickly. I inspected the object of my desire. Me and Antonio's apartment number 6, which he named the Tramp Hole, was less than a block or two away. I knew it would be too heavy for me to push, and it would possibly become more damaged than it may have already been. So I scurried down the alley and then east to the furniture store that I knew was on the corner of US 1 and Atlantic Avenue. I asked the clerk if I could borrow a dolly, and he assured him that I would return it immediately after I explained what I required for it. Not much to my surprise and to my pleasure, the mail clerk said, "Sure, no problem." I pushed it back to the alley to pick up my treasure. I remember being so excited to show him. He was a skilled musician and songwriter. I always loved the piano and had always wanted to learn how to play. Perhaps we could create together, I remember thinking as I struggled to get it into the doorway. Once I had it inside the door, I pulled it off the dolly and near an electrical outlet. I bent down, only slightly sweaty and a bit out of breath, and I plugged it in. I switched the power button on and saw the tangerine button light up. I lit up too as I pressed down on a few ominous notes and heard it come out loud and clear. It worked! I nearly laughed. I was so pleased, so proud of myself over this little adventure. Not only having found it, but the charismatic and resourceful way in which I retrieved the dolly and my physical stamina for lifting and pushing the organ all the way home. I kept thinking how happy Tony would be and how marvelous his new addition to our eccentric, humble abode was. How perfect it seemed. I thought of nothing else while I waited for him to come home from his day job at the sign factory. A year later, when we were breaking up, I made sure that the organ stayed with me. As I was packing up my belongings, he preferred his guitar anyway. I remember he left his markings upon it in permanent marker on the center keys, indicating which note was associated with which letter. I don't remember them any longer. He did try to teach me in the same regimented way he was taught. Antonio had attended Berkeley, the College of Music in Boston, Massachusetts, before he had succumbed to the lure of heroin and was sent to my childhood city of Delray Beach, Florida, for detox and rehab. We met when he had only 6 months clean and he was 21 years old. I was over 3 years clean and sober and 19 years old. We fell in love almost instantly. I do not think he would argue this fact even after all these years have passed. Alas, we were children still, and childlike was our love. In my life, I have allowed men to make me feel like a possession, a means to an end, a convenience, a punching bag, admired but misunderstood. With Antonio, I felt only love, but I felt also like his albatross. In the end, like most endings, he was going in one direction and I was going in another. We were no longer aligned. I expected far too much of him anyway. He was a newly recovering addict in his early 20s, and I expected him to pay the rent, buy the cigarettes, and the booze. I had expensive taste back then, Bombay Sapphire to be exact, and every time he would restock and pay for everything. I never even asked him to. He just picked up where my husband had left off, financially speaking. I think he felt somewhat responsible for my predicament, possibly because when me and Tony had fooled around, my supposed husband came back from work early and deliberately walked in on us. He saw Tony in only his spots. It was me lying naked in my bed. I used my bed because it was my Grandmary's bed before it became mine, and he had been sleeping on the couch for many months anyway. What I think Antonio didn't understand is that I had told Max many times for years that I did not want to be with him, that I indeed hated him and wanted to see other people. Yet when Max witnessed the actual act, it was as if he finally understood I was not his. It finally became real to him, and was on the tipping point. That was when he began making arrangements with his sister in Long Island to leave with my children. I think Antonio did feel responsible, though he had no fault in it. What Max did was unforgivable and disparate from Max's actions. Max's actions. Responsible or not, he did a damn good job as both caretaker and lover, but he grew to resent me more and more with each day. At that point, I did not know any different. I had begun working a part-time job before the children left at Gizzy's Coffee. After that, Starbucks, where the hours and pay were better. I would spend the majority of the money I made on gifts for myself, mostly music from back loan and books. I never had a chance to do that before. At first, Antonio was happy to see me happy, and I believe more so just to see me free. He was incredibly patient with me. I had told him how my life had been, We were very open in this regard, exchanging our secrets, our fears, our shame. He knew about my mother first giving me away at 12 to Sheridan House, being gone for 1 year, then shortly after returning, sent away again at 14 to the starting place, 13 Baker Acts, the Juvenile Detention Center, my mother signing away her parental rights and giving me the state at 15, then becoming pregnant while living on my second foster home at the age of 16 by a man more than 10 years my senior, the father of my children. He knew that I felt like a prisoner living with that man, and that my 2 children sometimes felt more like siblings. I admitted to him in shame and confusion. Despite all that baggage, he accepted it as part of the package, and he loved me in despite of it, which I found utterly baffling at the time. He understood my experience was unusual and took care of me, only enabling me slightly, always encouraging me to be more independent. I was very reluctant at first, but eventually started to buy my own cigarettes and some of the rent. For the majority of our 2-year liaison, it was a fairy tale romance. We made love often and well, our skinny bodies intertwined perfectly in a twin-sized bed. Yet I was cruel to him at times. He wrote lyrics describing that part of me. They are the only lyrics I remember, and I'm not sure this is the exact wording he used. I doubt he sings it anymore. They went like this. Her dagger tongue, it cuts so deep, so cold that this whole room could freeze. She's only trying to hide her love from me, my love, my love, my love. It was a poignant and beautiful melody, the kind I loved. Sometimes the songs he wrote were more punk in rhythm and sound. I think his talent was far too large for such a genre, and although it's not my story to tell, I can't help but think he would work best alone in a studio with multiple instruments there for him to mix with his words and his beloved guitar, much like Tom York does these days. I think he would flourish as an artist with that solitude and freedom. Sadly, like all fairy tales, there is no happy ending, not in the originals. They are cautionary tales, as was ours. It was Antonio who injected me for the first time. I held my left arm out as he knelt before me with his proposal and his insight. My right hand was held tight with some kind of love, a mutual understanding by another girl. I was so hesitant. Every time he would place the point near my virginal skin, I would shrink back and clutch at my arm. He said, "Don't you want a vacation?" referring to my constant anxiety and sorrow. I nodded and said goodbye inwardly. I clenched my fist and averted my eyes to the right, where I was met with the most beautiful golden green eyes I had ever seen. I stared into Brianna's eyes as she smiled faintly and squeezed my hand as the opiate worked its way from my main line to the opioid receptors of my brain. All I can say about that moment was that it felt like all the fear, all the pain, the excruciating weight of it all was lifted. I was warm and weightless. Suddenly nothing mattered anymore. It was no longer my problem. I felt nothing, save the sudden disappearance of a weight so heavy that I didn't even realize how enormous the burden was until it had been lifted. I felt angelic and pure. I might as well have sprouted a pair of wings. Perhaps that is where the expression comes from. There's an expression that says, he gave me my wings. It's like referring to the person that gives you your first shot of heroin. I don't like that expression, but perhaps that's where it came from. Yes, like any heroin addict would say, past or present, active or inactive, I found what I had been looking for, though I didn't know it until it found me. As you can understand, something of that magnitude does not come without repercussions, a price, as I have alluded to in some of my other poetry and prose. In that moment, though, I was an angel, and there was another to my right. Beautiful and glorious sweet creatures were, not Antonio. He looked like a maggot to me there on the ground. He was hideous to me in that moment. As he took the needle out of my arm, I had demonized and made him the villain, as if I needed another one. That was when I ceased to consciously love him. I do not resent him, not anymore. I never really did. He was just a carrier of a contagion that was looking for a host. It could have been anyone on their knees with a needle to my arm. It just happened to be someone who I loved and trusted very much so. As I said, childlike was our love. I knew I was in deep water. Somehow I knew once I gave him my arm, I had given up so much more. I chose Leith, and she chose me. Mary Catherine.